As we all know, is the fifth and last webinar on the blue zone, on the blue zones of the world. Depending on your perspective, I may have saved the best for last. I don't know. That we'll talk a little bit more about preferences towards the end. But so today we are talking about Sardinia, Italy. So just as a reminder, we've covered kind of, not all regions of the world, but it's pretty, the blue zones are definitely pretty widely dispersed. So we started off with Loma Linda, there she is, Loma Linda, California. Then we went to Nicoya, Costa Rica. Then we went to Ikaria, Greece. Last week we did Okinawa, Japan. And then we're wrapping it up here in Italy. So, there are, as with all the other webinars, some similarities with Sardinia and all the other blue zones, but there are also some pretty major differences. If you want, yeah. Okay. Angus, sorry. Angus. Okay. Anyway, what we're going to do is today's webinar is a little bit longer. We're going to do the usual kind of presentation. I'll talk to you guys a little bit about what the specifics are of the Sardinia diet, lifestyle, etc. And then we'll wrap it up with some feedback and insight from Simona Westland, who is originally from Sardinia. And then we'll talk a little bit about a new, the last 5 to 10 minutes or so, we'll talk a little bit about a new challenge that I will be launching for everybody at DLS who is interested in participating. Hopefully that's everybody, but we'll see. Okay, so Sardinia is the original blue zone. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but you can see the map just for location. If you didn't know where it is, it's actually not on mainland, in the mainland of Italy, but it is in fact the second largest island in the Mediterranean Sea. Population of about 1.65 million, and the sheep population, that's the human population, is 1.65 million. There are about 4 million sheep as well in Sardinia, which that population is rivaled only by certain parts of the UK. So it's a pretty substantial sheep population. Sardinia is considered a little bit of a microcontinent because they have, yeah, you can go. Because there's so many different types of climate, there are different types of landscape. You've got some kind of rocky, craggy mountains, you've got beaches, you've got like expansive fields. So you can basically find anything, any kind of landscape you want. It's kind of the joke in Sardinia. And then another kind of uniqueness of Sardinia, which is similar to specifically Nicoya, is that it's pretty geographically isolated, as you can see from the map. So that has meant that to a certain extent, there hasn't been a lot of immigration or migration to Sardinia in the past historically. So there hasn't been a lot of, for lack of a better term, diluting of the Sardinian genes, which researchers do believe has had some positive effect on making it a blue zone. So the numbers. Why is Sardinia considered a blue zone? First of all, they have 10 times as many centenarians per capita as the United States does. The numbers, similar to, we talked about this last week with Okinawa, it's the number for Sardinia is less than Okinawa. If you remember, it was about 37.5 centenarians for every 100,000 people in Okinawa. So Sardinia isn't quite as impressive as that, but 22 centenarians for every 100,000 people is still pretty impressive. As I talked about last week, just looking at that number, 22 out of every 100,000 doesn't seem that impressive until you start really thinking about it. I sure as heck have not met 22 centenarians in my life. So I think I can count on this hand how many people over the age of 100 I have met. The other uniqueness of Sardinia is that it is the world, he told me, is that there are, in most areas, women tend to reach the age of 100 in a lot higher numbers than the men do. In Sardinia, it is a 1-to-1 ratio for men to women, which is very unique. In the US, it is 1-to-5. So for every 1 man who reaches the age of 100 in the US, that's 5 women reach the age of 100. But in Sardinia, for every 1 man who reaches that age, 1 woman does as well. Angus, go away, please. An interesting thing about Sardinia in terms of genetics is that researchers have found is that they have the M26 gene marker, which is, it's hard to explain the science behind it, but it has been linked to longevity. And this is a particularly strong gene marker within the Sardinian population. So we talked about the telomeres, which is the end of a gene being longer in certain blue zones. This is kind of a similar biomarker. And then the other thing about Sardinia is, as I mentioned, they're pretty isolated. So they've lived kind of a traditional healthy lifestyle for years. And Simona can speak to this better than I can, but for, a large part of the population, they continue to lead that kind of very traditional lifestyle that is not real heavy on technology. There's a lot of agriculture. It's just very traditional. Yeah, so anyway, and you can see a picture of the lovely sheep here. Now, like I said, Sardinia is considered to be the original blue zone. Basically what happened was that back in 2004, Dan Buettner, I've mentioned him a number of times, he is a National Geographic Fellow. He was the one who started the research. So National Geographic went in with the National Institute of Aging. What happened is Dan Buettner was in contact with an Italian researcher who was conducting like a survey of census data, and he was using a blue check mark in all areas where there are centenarians, or for every centenarian within a specific region. And basically Sardinia was just a big blue blob. There were so many centenarians that it wasn't check marks, it was just a big blue blob. Hence the genesis of the term, the blue zones. So it is in many ways the original blue zone, and kind of set the the standards, the benchmarks for naming of subsequent blue zones. Now, what does the Sardinian diet actually look like? It is really considered kind of a form of the Mediterranean diet in many ways. Mediterranean diet, of course, is the one that we talked about with Icaria, Greece in particular. If you remember, it was high in, they ate a lot of beans, a lot of vegetables, a lot of whole grains. They used olive oil for cooking, also just as, for flavoring their foods. But the Sardinian diet is, of course, a little bit different because they have so many sheep, roughly 4 million, in fact. They do eat a lot of sheep cheese as well as goat cheese. Pecorino cheese is a very popular cheese in Sardinia. It's very high in those omega-3 fatty acids, which are really good for a lot of different parts of your body, but particularly for brain development and kind of memory retention, etc. So you can see a picture of that cheese there. Again, goat milk and cheese is very popular. If you've not had it, I don't drink it on a regular basis myself, not for any particular reason, but it does tend to be more palatable for those people who are either lactose intolerant or lactose sensitive. It's got a pretty mild flavor, at least the milk does, and it's kind of chock full of all sorts of antioxidants. It's higher in calcium and protein than cow's milk, so they do focus a lot on the sheep and goat milk and cheese. Simona had mentioned that in recent years, or she can talk about this more than I can in a few moments, but they have started drinking more cow milk. So it looks like it's kind of leveling out. Cow's milk is making kind of a play for the Sardinian diet, but goat milk and sheep milk are still quite popular. As with all the other blue zones, vegetables are very much centerpiece of the diet. Some that are typically grown and kind of locally available in relative abundance are wild asparagus, which is apparently a little bit different than kind of the asparagus you'll get at Safeway or Giant or whatever. Fennel, which is a very specific flavor. I don't eat a lot of it myself, but it's got almost like a licorice, black licorice kind of taste. And then mushrooms, wild mushrooms as well. Now, for anybody who has been a DLS for any amount of time, back when we were in the office, you know well that Simona makes some fantastic bread. Sardinians tend to make their own bread. There are two main types that typically come up. One is this kind of homemade flatbread. It's higher in fiber than most breads are. And then they also have a kind of unique sourdough bread that they make. Different types of bread as well, but those are kind of the two big ones that are mentioned. As far as whole grains, they eat a lot of barley. Barley is great in soups. You can grind it up and make flour. And then they do also eat a lot of beans, as a lot of these other blue zones have kind of, had as a cornerstone of their diets. Chickpeas in particular, and fava beans. And then, of course, tomatoes. If you couple tomatoes with olive oil, it helps the body, it enables the body to absorb nutrients and antioxidants better than if you eat them alone. So those are kind of some of the staples. Now you'll recognize this pie chart again, last time you'll see it, but the Sardinian diet has been called the peasant food diet because a lot of, most of the foods are very basic, kind of simple foods. It is certainly starting to change a little bit now with more more diversity in the population and just as things tend to do. But the basic kind of core, the framework of the diet does remain pretty simple. It is a very lean plant-based diet. As I already mentioned, the primary dairy that people in Sardinia get is from sheep and goat's milk as opposed to cow milk. Cow milk, particularly in this country, it comes with certainly nutritional benefits, but it's also kind of a controversial thing because a lot of dairy farms use hormones and preservatives that are not good for you. So this is very kind of straight from the source, sheep and goat's milk. I already mentioned the barley. That's, you see 47% whole grains. So barley in soups, barley is in salads, and then they grind the barley up and use it in flour for baking as well. Again, as with really literally every single other blue zone, you'll notice the meat is really a very small part of what they eat. Some things I was reading yesterday were talking about how meat is becoming a little bit more popular in certain parts of Sardinia, but just in general, it is still used really as an accent or really for special occasions, or maybe reserved for a special family dinner on Sunday. But it's just definitely not a very prominent part of most people's diets. There's not a lot, you can see this is also kind of a unique thing, very little added sugar. That's pretty common across all the blue zones, but very few added fats too. They don't do, it doesn't seem like they do a lot of desserts. If and when they do, it's, they tend to use almonds. They'll grind it up into an almond paste. I found some good kind of almond cookie recipes that looked pretty tasty. I might give those a try. And then they also, as I said, they do eat the beans. But one thing about Sardinia that's a little bit different than some of the other blue zones, the exception of really, so this similar to Icaria in this way, that wine is a pretty common, it's common for people to drink 3 to 4 small glasses of red wine per day. So it's a special kind of wine. I imagine there are different varieties available, but this Canino wine, which is locally sourced, that is a very popular wine that people imbibe in, multiple times a day. So red wine, as we've talked about, is chock full of antioxidants, and really can be very beneficial for your heart if consumed in moderation, of course. Now, this is one other kind of uniqueness to Sardinia. I have never had it, and it's not overly widely used right now. From what I was reading, it was used more kind of, 10, 20 years ago, but it does still take a place in the diet in certain areas, but this mastic oil. So this is a picture of the shrub from which this oil is derived. With olive oil, of course, that's obtained by pressing the olives. Mastic oil comes from pressing these berries. Like I said, it used to be used more for cooking than it is now. Olive oil has started becoming more commonplace than it used to be. But mastic oil is quite the kind of superstar in terms of health benefits. It's got anti-inflammatory properties. It's been used as an antifungal, so it has medicinal properties, and antibacterial, and it's also apparently very good for your skin. So you can actually just apply it to your skin. It will help kind of clear things up on your face or wherever you want to use it. Again, I've never had it, so this is just going off of what I've read, but apparently it has a quite woody kind of woodsy flavor. So it's definitely a very distinctive flavor, which might account for why it's not used as much in cooking now, because olive oil, when you cook with it, it doesn't really affect the flavor as much. But apparently this one is quite distinctive. But if you can ever find it, I'm sure you can get it at certain specialty stores, perhaps like Whole Foods or what is it? Balducci's probably has it. It's probably pretty expensive, but because mastic and lentisk are not exactly indigenous to the United States, I don't think. But yeah, if you ever do find it, give it a shot. I'd be interested to hear what it actually does when you use it for cooking. Now, moving on to lifestyle. So a lot of the lifestyle values that are of great importance to the Sardinian population traditionally are similar to what we've seen with the other blue zones. Family first. Family, especially extended family, is tremendously important in the Sardinian culture. Having a solid network, having good relationships with your family, having that kind of support, that kind of constant, just constantly having people around you who love you and support you has been tied quite strongly with lower rates of depression, lower rates of suicide, lower rates of stress, certainly. And that extends to elders as well. Here in the US especially, it certainly depends on your background, but the typical kind of American way of dealing with elders in your family is to, have them go to a nursing home or assisted living. Once you reach a certain age, everybody talks about retirement in this country. Once you reach a certain age, you're almost, considered, irrelevant. It's like you retire and then what do? You just hang out. So in Sardinian culture, not only are the elders considered very wise, they are revered for the wisdom that they have, earned through hard-won experience, hard-fought experience, but they're included in things. They don't really retire, and part of that is that they're not so heavy in Sardinia on kind of like the traditional office jobs and career trajectories. So the elders are still expected to and desired to participate in kind of running the household. If it's an agrarian system, then helping with the agriculture. They're just, they're still included. They're part of the family. It's not unusual in Sardinia for there to be very large family homes where 2 to 3 generations live in one house together. Ask your average American if they want their parents living with them, American adult, and I can pretty much promise you that answer is no. It just does not happen a lot here. It doesn't really seem to happen as much in a lot of the other blue zones. Perhaps Icaria, I didn't really see a lot referenced about that. But that's something that you don't see in a lot of cultures. So it's the concept of extended family, just a natural support network that's always there for you. And then also friends, in addition to family, friends are a big part of the Sardinian just kind of lifestyle and culture. It's pretty normal for people to go from work to a lunch with friends. The lunch takes a while. It's maybe an hour, 2 hours, maybe more. It's not unusual for people to just kind of go home after lunch. And they're known, the Sardinian culture is known for being one that really kind of values the importance of laughter, and just, the benefits of laughter, and just, recognizing that life is worth living with a good sense of humor, and not taking ourselves too seriously. So that kind of leads into the next point, which is a relaxed work day. Again, and it's not everywhere, of course, it's not every single person there, but the general approach is that the workday hours are kind of unstructured and relaxed. Again, people sometimes will take a long lunch, maybe they go back to the office, maybe they don't. And then there really just is not this kind of, I'll use America again as an example, because obviously it's what I know, but, career, trajectory, career steps, your career planning, these are things that are, kind of drilled into us from day one as being important. How high up the ladder can you go? How many hours a week are you working? Did you take all your vacation this year? Or were you, how hard are you working? It's just not the focus in Sardinia for most people. It doesn't mean they don't work. Doesn't mean they don't have aspirations and they're not driven, but it's just, it's a much more relaxed approach. It's like this kind of the whole dichotomy between, do you live to work or do you work to live? In America, I think sometimes we live to work. I think it's starting to change now, but for a long time, certainly that was kind of the mentality here, whereas in Sardinia, it's more working to live. So, and more sheep, of course, they're everywhere. It's kind of a shepherd's lifestyle in many ways, that's been called. I've talked about other blue zones in the past as the whole idea of, eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper. Sardinia is a little bit different. They do tend to live this shepherd's lifestyle, which involves rising early. They're not sleeping until 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning like people are in Ikaria, but they tend to have breakfast then quite early, and that tends to be the sweetest meal of the day for them. Lunch is the biggest meal of the day for most people in Sardinia. As I already mentioned, it's considered a very good social occasion, either with friends, family, both. And then dinner, it's a little bit later. I don't know obviously exactly what time most people eat, but a lot of the blue zones have focused more on the kind of early dinner, but Sardinians tend to eat it later, and it's quite light. And again, simplicity is kind of the name of the game for the Sardinian diet. And then this idea of functional exercise. I really like this term because I think it removes the barrier that a lot of people have to implementing exercise on a daily basis. Because if you make it, if it's a chore, if it's something that you have to get up, get in your car, drive to the gym, pick up certain weights, go through a specific routine, you're probably going to be less likely to do it because it becomes something like you have to do. Functional exercise, the concept behind it, as I'm sure you can imagine, is that it's exercise that you just kind of naturally do over the course of your day. It's just naturally built into your lifestyle. Functional exercise is something that many people get in communities where cars are not as prominent. And a lot of U.S. cities, unfortunately, we do rely on cars to get most places. When I lived in Prague in, 2008 for a couple of months. I didn't have a car, obviously, and I didn't even run that much, but I was in really, really good shape simply because I was walking everywhere. So this functional exercise is a big part of the shepherd's lifestyle. They're just walking. It's not even something they think about. It's just something you just naturally do. So, one takeaway from Sardinia would be to kind of think about ways that you can incorporate functional exercise in a more functional manner into your life, whether that's identifying places that you really can walk. There's, I live right around the corner from a Safeway, so I'm lucky. I can just walk there. There are multiple stores, some places I can walk within, half a mile. And I understand that it's not always, if you're going grocery shopping, sometimes you need a car. If it's like 100 degrees outside, sometimes you don't want to walk. I get it. But just start thinking about ways that you can just naturally incorporate exercise more into your day. Now for sample recipe, there were quite a lot that looked really good, but ultimately I decided on this one because these are ingredients that you can typically get at most, fennel's probably the most exotic, quote unquote exotic thing on this ingredient list. But I see it as, it's a safe way pretty much every time I go there. I'll admit I haven't used it much. I've used it maybe a handful of times in my life, but it's quite good. So this fennel, basil, and tomato salad, super easy, fresh ingredients, just some lemon juice, a shallot, which is just kind of an onion, smaller onion, some olive oil. There's that olive oil usage, which again has those good fats and will help keep you full. Some fennel bulbs, and then Campari or grape tomatoes, whatever kind of tomatoes you can get your hands on, and then some fresh basil leaves. So, it doesn't require turning on your stove. It doesn't even require turning on like your stove top. All you have to do is do a little bit of, cutting, slicing, whisking, and then toss everything together. And you've got a really nice, it looks good, it looks pretty. And I've not made this one yet, but it's on my list. And I'm sure it's quite good. But anyway, and again, the cookbook that I have, the Blue Zones Diet Kitchen, there are lots of good recipes from Sardinia. And you also have, speaking of cooking from Sardinia, we have a resident cook in Simona who is a fantastic cook. If you've ever eaten anything that she's made, she's fantastic. And speaking of Simona, I am going to turn it over to her just for, your insight, Simona, if this is a good representation of what it is like to grow up in Sardinia, or anything you want to share that's a little bit different.
Sure. So I took a couple of notes of something that I wanted to point out, kind of like going backwards on something you talked about just in the previous slide about food. I would say that the representation was pretty accurate. What's important, it's kind of that we really use a few ingredients, but that are very good, that are very flavorful. So my recommendation, and also kind of like what I had to adapt when I came here in the US, is just trying to simplify the way we eat by being careful about the single ingredients we're buying. And to give people an example, like when I arrived here, I told my husband that pasta with zucchini was one of my favorite pastas, and he didn't really understand why. And I tried to make it. I was in Indiana at that point, and of course I bought it at a grocery store and bought the zucchini at a grocery store, and it didn't taste like back home. So the problem is that it was a very simple recipe with a few ingredients, and the flavor of the zucchini was key. So when I saw the amount of spices and the long list of ingredients when I arrived here, I was quite surprised. So probably in the attempt of going towards that direction, of course, everything you said about the beans and the vegetables and the sheep milk cheese, everything is correct, but probably an important aspect, it's also making sure that the food you cook, it's tasteful, it's good, even if it's simple. By using good ingredients. The other interesting part when you said about the reverence of that we have for elderly people, that's absolutely true. I think here in the US, I also perceive sometimes that from the elderly side, there is the feeling about not to want to bother you or to be on the way. And so it comes even from older people, not to want to leave in the kids' houses is not just like a matter of like younger people not wanting their parents living with them, versus like I feel that back home there is even this concept about building the houses like on top of your parents' house. So you would see very often houses that are like half built, that like the top part is just like bricks and has holes for where the windows would be, and they're like started for the kids then to finish up and live above you. So there is that concept of staying close together, living close by, so that the grandparents and the parents can be part of the life. And one other thing that I was thinking to share was yes, about the life of like elderly people is also very social, on the side that like it's typical for them to stay in touch with friends and kind of like just hang out in the little piazzas in the town, and or at a bar cafe, like sitting there and playing cards and just like looking at what's going on in the town. So when my husband came for the first time, and he has blue eyes, and of course all Sardinians have dark hair and dark eyes, so like he would laugh that every once in a while, like when we would be walking by, like some older women, older people like would look at him kind of saying like, oh, he's not from here, like where is he from? But otherwise, and also one more thing I wanted to mention about the exercising, that's like I don't remember what's the term that you use, but that's
Functional exercise.
That's completely true. Like you don't feel like you have to exercise, because just like it's part of your life, like just like you're walking everywhere. And though I need to precise one thing I recognize that's hard to do here. It's not just a lifestyle. Like here in the US, it's you probably could not do it. Like back home, the way that the urban development is done, like that's made to do that. Like the houses are smaller and very close to each other, next to each other, and you have at very close by, like the post office, the butcher, the baker. So like it's you walk everywhere. And then outside the small town, you have like the pieces of land where everybody or most of the people in the village go out there every day, where they have like oranges and olive trees and vineyards and stuff like that. So it's easier to just like walk so much in your normal life, and you don't realize your exercises, but you're just walking everywhere.
So Simona, let me ask you this: how do you how do you compensate for the difference in ingredients? Like where do you get your ingredients? Where do you shop?
So as far as like the basic ingredients, like fruit and vegetables, I tend to be like, when I first arrived in the US, like I was amazed that you can get watermelon and strawberry in December. And for me, it was more like, I was more impressed on like the possibility just of doing that. But now I learned that it's not the same.
It's not a good thing.
Yes. So like I try to buy seasonal things, recognizing that the flavor is not just that it's not good because here in the grocery store, the vegetables and the fruit is not good. It's more like it might just be out of season. So just being careful about what's in season, and then trying to buy as much as possible from farmer's market, or maybe like this year we did a CSA. So like we never knew about doing it or not doing it. This year seemed good with the fact that we're at home, we're cooking more. And if you find one that's convenient, that you're really going with seasonal. You're going, like we have been eating asparagus for the past 6 weeks or so because it's like the main ingredient for the month of June.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's definitely a unique thing here that not only can you get literally every fruit and vegetable at any time of year, they also tend to be like massive. So like with zucchini, I'm sure a big part of that was it was probably a lot bigger than you're used to back in Sardinia, I'm guessing. So be fair warning for everybody. Bigger is not always better when you're buying produce. In fact, it's quite the opposite. You lose, the bigger something tends to be, the less flavor it tends to have. So anyway, well, thank you, Simona.
No problem.
We appreciate it.